Significant events that happened in the month of February in the United States of America. On February 1, 1960, the Greensboro sit-ins began, a series of nonviolent protests against racial discrimination. The protests began when 4 African American college students from North Carolina Agricultural and Technical State University sat down at a Woolworth's lunch counter and requested service. The counter was reserved for white customers only, and the students were refused service. On February 2, 1887, a group of groundhog hunters known as the Punxsutawney Groundhog Club in Punxsutawney, Pennsylvania, began the tradition of using a groundhog to predict the weather on this day. According to the legend, if the groundhog emerges from its burrow on this day and sees its shadow, it will retreat back into its burrow, indicating 6 more weeks of winter weather. On February 3, 1870, the 15th Amendment to the United States Constitution was ratified. This amendment prohibits the federal and state governments from denying a citizen the right to vote based on that citizen's race, color, or previous condition of servitude. The amendment was added to the Constitution as a result of the Civil War and the abolition of slavery, and it was intended to ensure that African American men had the right to vote. On February 4, 1932, the first Winter Olympics in the United States began in Lake Placid, New York. The Games were held until February 15th and included 6 countries competing in 6 events in Nordic and cross-country skiing, skating, and ice hockey. The Games were a success and were considered to be very well organized. On February 5, 2020, the United States Senate acquitted President Donald Trump in his first impeachment trial. The impeachment process began in December 2019, when the House of Representatives voted to impeach the president on charges of abuse of power and obstruction of Congress. On February 6, 1778, the Treaty of Alliance and the Treaty of Amity and Commerce were signed between the United States and France in Paris. This was the first official recognition of the United States as a sovereign nation by any European country. The Treaty of Alliance was a military alliance between the 2 countries, while the Treaty of Amity and Commerce established a framework for economic and diplomatic relations. On February 7, 1984, Bruce McCandless became the first human to float free from any earthly anchor when he stepped out of the Space Shuttle Challenger and flew away from the ship. This was the first untethered spacewalk in history, and it marked a significant achievement in space exploration as it allowed astronauts to move around more freely. On February 8, 1924, lethal gas was used at the Nevada State Prison as a form of execution for the first time in the United States on convicted murderer G. John. The use of lethal gas as a method of execution was not widely adopted in the United States and was phased out in the latter half of the 20th century. On February 9, 1943, the Battle of Guadalcanal officially came to an end, marking a major victory for the United States Marine Corps over the Imperial Japanese Army. The battle took place between August 7, 1942 and February 9, 1943 on and around the island of Guadalcanal in the Pacific Theater of Operations. The battle was intense and brutal, with both sides suffering heavy casualties. It was one of the longest and bloodiest battles of the Pacific War. On February 10, 2009, the United States Senate approved the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act of 2009, commonly known as the stimulus package, which was a $787 billion package of spending and tax cuts intended to stimulate the American economy during the Great Recession. The bill was passed by the House of Representatives on January 28, 2009, and was signed into law by President Barack Obama on February 17, 2009. On February 11, 2012, the music world was left in shock as the news broke that Whitney Houston, one of the most iconic and successful artists of all time, had passed away. She was found dead in her room at the Beverly Hilton Hotel in Beverly Hills, California, at the age of 48. The cause of death was determined to be accidental drowning, with heart disease and cocaine use as contributing factors. On February 12, 1870, women gained the right to vote in the Utah Territory. This was relatively early in comparison to other states in the United States, as the 19th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, which granted women the right to vote nationwide, was not ratified until August 18, 1920. The right to vote for women in Utah was granted by the territorial legislature, and it was the first time women in the United States had been granted the right to vote through the actions of a legislature rather than through a state or federal constitutional amendment. On February 13, the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, ARRA, was passed by the United States House of Representatives, and signed into law by President Barack Obama on February 17, 2009. The bill was designed to provide a stimulus to the U.S. economy in the wake of the 2008 financial crisis, and provided funding for infrastructure projects, tax cuts, and various other programs. On February 14, 1876, both Alexander Graham Bell and Elisha Gray applied for a patent on their new invention, the telephone. A bitter legal battle ensued over who should receive the patent. Bell's application had been filed first, so he received patent rights. History now recalls Bell saying, "Mr. Watson, come here, I need you," as the very first telephone call. On February 15, 1953, Tenley Albright, a 17-year-old from Boston, becomes the first American female to win the World Figure Skating Championship. All 7 judges at the event at an outdoor rink in Davos, Switzerland, give her a first-place vote. Albright was a pioneer in the sport of figure skating, and her win at the World Championship was a significant achievement for American figure skating. On February 16, 1838, Kentucky passed the first statewide woman suffrage law which permitted young Kentucky women to attend school. However, it came with a condition: anyone hoping to attend school in Kentucky needed to agree to never use the word Darwin in a classroom. This law was significant as it was one of the first steps towards women's education and voting rights in the United States. On February 17, 1913, the New York Armory Show officially opened its doors to the public, introducing them to the works of European and American artists who were considered avant-garde at the time. This show introduced Picasso, Matisse, Duchamp to the U.S. public. On February 18, 1930, American astronomer Clyde Tombaugh discovered Pluto while working at Lowell Observatory in Arizona. He was tasked with finding a 9th planet, which was predicted to exist beyond Neptune based on the irregularities in the orbits of Uranus and Neptune. However, in 2006, the International Astronomical Union reclassified Pluto as a dwarf planet. On February 19, 1914, 4-year-old Charlotte May Pierstorff was mailed by train from Grangeville, Idaho to her grandparents' house 73 miles away in most famous Child in the Post instance. Charlotte May Pierstorff was mailed by her parents using a 53-cent stamp attached to her coat. She left Grangeville and arrived in Lewiston to her grandparents safely. On February 20, 1962, astronaut John Glenn orbited Earth aboard the Mercury spacecraft Friendship 7. This was the first time an American astronaut had orbited Earth, and it was a major achievement for the United States during the Cold War space race. After the successful mission, John Glenn became a national hero and was celebrated across the country. On February 21, 1965, rights activist Malcolm X was shot dead at the Audubon Ballroom in Harlem, New York City. He was assassinated in front of a crowd of his supporters while giving a speech. His death was a major loss for the civil rights movement, and it sparked a period of mourning and reflection among African Americans and human rights activists around the world. On February 22, 1980, the United States Olympic ice hockey team defeated the heavily favored Soviet Union team with the result 4-3 in the semifinals of the Winter Olympics, in a game that has come to be known as the Miracle on Ice. The win was a major upset, and it was considered to be one of the greatest moments in American sports history. The U.S. team went on to win the gold medal by defeating Finland in the final. On February 23, 1910, a national contest was held in the city for wireless telegraphers to test their speed and accuracy in receiving and transmitting American Morse telegraphic code signals via radio. The contest was a way to engage with the telegraphers community and build a loyal audience, but also a way to improve the technology and test the skills of telegraphers. On February 24, 1868, Andrew Johnson became the first U.S. president to be impeached. He was charged with violating the Tenure of Office Act, which was passed by the Congress to limit the president's power to remove officials without the Senate's approval. On February 25, 1964, American boxer Muhammad Ali, known at the time as Cassius Clay, became the world heavyweight champion. He defeated Sonny Liston in a surprise upset to win the title, which he would hold for several years and become one of the most iconic and influential figures in sports history. On February 26, 1993, the World Trade Center in New York City was bombed by a group of terrorists. The attack involved a truck bomb being detonated in the underground garage of the North Tower, killing 6 people and injuring over 1,000 others. On February 27, 1951, the 22nd Amendment to the Constitution of the United States was ratified, limiting the president to 2 terms in office. On February 28, 1983, the final episode of the television series MASH, entitled Goodbye, Farewell, and Amen, aired and became the most watched television episode in U.S. history with over 105 million people tuning in. On February 29, 1940, Hattie McDaniel becomes the first African-American person to be nominated for and win an Academy Award. She won the Best Actress in a Supporting Role for her portrayal of Mammy in the movie Gone with the Wind.